I'm very pleased to introduce a colleague, Elisabet ARNÓ-MACIà from the University of Politecnica de Catalunya. And she is an expert in English medium instruction and virtual collaboration and so on. We've been working together for a number of years now, and I'm very pleased that she is here with us, and she will be talking about these learning languages with technology. I have some handouts as well that I will be distribute, but of course you will be working using computers. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for your kind words. Well, expert, I wouldn't say expert, but I like exploring different fields, and I also feel that I can learn a lot from your colleagues and from you here. And it's a pleasure to be here. We're talking about technology, and I think that this is a high-tech environment. By the way, you have access to everything online. So apart from the hard copies of the handouts, I'll give you a link to Google Drive so that you can download handouts and the slides. So when Teresa asked me to give a seminar here to you, and I was thinking about technology, creativity and autonomy, and basically I was thinking of my own personal story, how I developed an interest in technology and doing things with technology, but not, the idea is that the talk is about technology, but not so much about technology per se, but about doing things with the help of technology. So this is quite high tech, so I'm not using all the technology here because one of the messages I want to transmit today is that I'm not interested in a technocentric approach. So I'll be ignoring the smart board and much of the technology that we have around us. So we'll just be interested in what we want to do. So let me tell you a little bit about me and this interest. I come from a technical university where I teach ESP to engineering students, and this is the place where I teach, Vilanova i la Geltrú, which is a nice coastal town in the south of Barcelona. You can see there. So if you have the chance to visit it, don't miss it. I also form part of a research group, which I found it was kind of curiosity. It's the class, so we've got the same acronym, Cercle de Lingüística Aplicada, Applied Linguistics Circle. So this is my research group, and both English medium instruction, ES and ESP on the one hand, and technology in education, these are two of the strands that we study as part of the research group. And how did I develop this interest in language learning with technology? This started like many years ago, about 20 years ago. This is, UOC, WOC, is the acronym for the Open University of Catalonia. So basically I was there when an online university was born. So I was privileged. I was in a privileged position. I was an external instructor because I was affiliated with the technical university. That was my main job. But I also taught English online. So we were discussing how technology affects teaching. And then many of the lessons I learned there were incorporated into my regular face-to-face teaching. So in a way, technology shaped the way I taught languages. Then I was enthusiastic about that, and the opportunity arose to participate in what was called at the time the Inter-Campus Program, and it was the joint offer of online courses from the different Catalan universities on a joint platform for any student from any Catalan university, from any degree. So a colleague and I developed this course and the textbook that goes with it, which was English for academic purposes, learning English through the web. So the course was run for a number of years, and I'll show you examples of activities that we designed to develop students' academic language skills and also digital literacies and learner autonomy. So I'll show some examples of that. Later on, we organized a conference on the topic of technology and languages for specific purposes. And from there, we worked on a book collecting different chapters, all of them revolving around technology. And in parallel to this, we developed also as part of a team this resource, an open online learning resource, also English for academic purposes, which was named Quantum Leap, Learning English for Academic Purposes. And I'll also show you some examples of that. Basically, it was intended as a tool for class use or independent learning, and we used it over a number of years, although the website is still on, but it is no longer maintained. And then, and Teresa referred to that, the TAP, the Transatlantic and Pacific Project. So here at the University of Padua, you can have renowned experts in the field of telecollaboration. Teresa and I have been working together on this project for a number of years, and I'll also refer to it, to online partnerships. Classes in remote places brought together over a task for which they have to collaborate, and students learn language and learn something more than that. So we'll explore some examples of that. So this seminar today, so I hope I won't be talking all the time because it's a bit long, so I'm looking forward to hearing you as well. We'll contextualize computer-assisted language learning and current trends. There's a lot of information on the slides, and I might skip some of that. I'm more interested in your views. But basically, I'm interested in discussing the role of technology. So the idea is not to approach technology as such, but to see how technology can be put to use for certain goals. And using technology to develop these three, I think, important skills, which are digital literacies. What literacies are we expected to instill in our students? Autonomy and creativity, whatever that means. And then I'll discuss some specific activities that I've chosen, examples from the projects I presented, and to see how the skills can be developed, and also suggest that you can design your own activity. But basically, we can adapt this seminar to your needs or your own practices or interests. So let's see how far we can get and what we want to cover. We don't have to cover everything either. By the way, you've got a link there. So if you go to the link, you'll access the folder with the slides and the handouts. So you may want to open the folder. I'll keep an eye on the time. Can you all see the URL? I'll give you some time to copy it. It's a short Google URL, so it's GOO.gl/2A capital V 185.
Okay. So this gets us to your slides?
Yes, slides and handout. Google Drive folder, if everything works. Yeah, right. So I'd like to start with your experience, and I know some of you, but I don't know others. So I would like to hear about your profile, your experience, your students, I guess, of the master's degree.
Yeah.
Master's degree in language teaching or translation.
We are studying modern languages.
Modern languages.
Communication.
Communication and modern languages. So you might be interested in language teaching as a possible option at some point. Do you have any experience in teaching?
Sometimes I have some private lessons.
Private
Young
lessons.
kids, but
You might end up teaching at some point, or maybe creating modular activities, or if you're as a tutor, even if you're not in the school system or in the formal educational system, you might be interested in using technology to help someone, or due to coaching. And some people I know, of course, from the department. And so, how do you use technology in your lives, studies, work? Specific applications for teaching and learning? Any courses? Well, research in code probably. Have you taken any courses in computer-assisted language learning, or?
yes, in my first year, we had a course with Professor that explained us how to deal with CAD tools mainly, and that facilitates our translation, for example, because it makes it faster. So, yeah, sometimes in my translation I use it, but this is a way to make that easier.
So that's a very interesting application of technology, CAD tools, computer-assisted translation tools, to make your job easier, faster. So that's putting technology to good use. More applications. So we find technology is a kind of helper to do the task. And sometimes technology that gets in the way, like obstructing our task, not facilitating it. And so, how has technology shaped the way we teach and learn languages? And I should add, translate, those of you who are involved in translation, professional translation. So you gave an example, those tools make my task much easier and faster. By some learning.
I think technology has totally shaped the way I teach. And I don't know, maybe you as language learners, did you all do your triennale here in Canada? Yeah. You probably used quite a lot of technology then throughout your degree course. So.
Yes, we have, for example, every lecture is made with a lot of slides, with the use of technical devices, and yes.
Lots of slides. And do you use your devices, for example, your smartphones, or what devices do you use?
I mainly use my laptop.
Laptop.
Yeah.
Tablets, smartphones, and lots of slides, lots of technology. And sometimes it can be distracting, I guess. Also, you have like too much. So, and we use some tools consciously, like the slides. Do you feel that we use other tools maybe less consciously? For example, some years ago, I said, okay, I'm showing some slides, take notes. And then I was surprised. It doesn't surprise me anymore because it is what I do. So take notes, and for me taking notes was pen and pencil. But for the student was going to not laptop, but maybe desktop, or if we were in the computer class, or laptop when they had a laptop. So technology is permeating. Now we're using this lab, but we don't really need it, because if we want to access this, we all have a computer in our pockets. So this has changed also. I used to have classes in computer labs. I don't have them there anymore. I mean, I say, okay, let's go share this. So technology becomes inconspicuous in a sense. One of my students this semester, and he surprised me, said, well, I've got a very interesting text. And I said, why don't you share it with us? And how do I make copies? And I was surprised, well, share it via, we have Moodle. So this idea, and especially new generation students, technology has been with you all your lives. We had to change to technology gradually. And this is something that was written like many years ago, well, many years too, in the year 2000, but I think this is still valid, the idea of technology as an empowering tool. And here I'm moving towards autonomy, creativity, and digital literacies, because all three, I think, are encompassed here. Creating, exchanging texts, and an act of wonder, something completely different from the past. We had textbooks, controlled exercises, and the idea of publishing. So maybe in the past students were recipients of text, but now they can publish and exchange and disseminate their text. So we wonder how we can empower our learners and how they can express a personal voice, but with boundaries. We look at that when we look at creativity in more detail. But I quite like this as quotation because it summarizes that a little bit. I just wanted to share with you some of the definitions and how the concept of computer-assisted language learning has changed over time, from the search for and study of applications of the computer in language teaching and learning to the principled application of new technologies. By the way, we don't talk about new technologies anymore. But at the time, they were new. So every time there was a new technology, people started talking about new technologies. But now it's like going back to the principles of teaching and learning. So no longer focusing on the technology, and I quite like this article by Nina Garrett, the full integration of technology into language learning. So it's not assisted. Combining technology, theory, and pedagogy. And here a more recent quote saying that the emphasis is not so much on those new technologies or emergent technologies, but the consequences of what we have for language teaching and learning and how they shape the way we learn and teach languages. Another quote, it's not enough to integrate technology, but rethinking how we teach and how we learn. And this is something I experienced when I started teaching in a technology-based environment. And they say, okay, you have to put yourselves in the shoes of the learner because the learner is at a distance. You have to make everything clear. You have to give the learner choice. And I say, why don't I give the learner choice, even if I see the learner every day? How can I provide better feedback? So I started rethinking. So the idea of interconnectivity and of reframing the way we teach and the way we learn. And here again, a bit reflecting a move from computer-assisted language learning, although the acronym is kept and is used in major journals and conferences, but arguing in favor of technology-enhanced language learning. So technology is not assisting, but it is part of the environment. So basically, what I get out of this is that language learning principles are there, and they are at the core in the planning of activities. And it's not so much which technology we use or how we integrate technology, but what we want to do and how technology can help us achieve those goals. faster and better, and how we do certain things that we wouldn't be able to do without the technology. So some pictures may be reflecting on those concepts. How has computer-assisted language learning, technology-enhanced language learning changed over time? What view of Carl does each picture represent? So we see different people interacting with technology in different ways. What assumptions of language and learning underlie each of them? So what is the role of technology? What kind of activities are they doing? What are teacher and learner roles? What can you see in the picture, on the pictures, the slide, about the evolution of technology over time and the use of technology in classes?
There's more focus on group work.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
More focus on group work, and what underlying methodologies would that be? So, for example,
Interactive
more interactive.
between the students, not so much that.
Mm-hmm.
It's more student and student, not teacher student.
Student, student, not teacher, student.
Or not screen and student.
Screen and student.
Yeah.
So we can see that this would be the older picture, and we can tell not only from the shape of the computer, but also the way we interact with the computer. So computer labs, individual, and the computer is the tutor. So that's Michael Levi's distinction between tutor and tool. So the computer teaches you. The computer knows a lot and tells you if you're right or wrong. And here, so we can see interaction, group work. So technology is there, but it's like having pencil or pen or paper, but not this as having a central role. Here's more apparent that technology might be more inconspicuous, like smaller devices and students focusing on things other than technology. What about these pictures? There's two pictures. Younger people using technology, so we don't have to teach students about technology. Now we have to teach teachers. A challenge that we have. How do we teach technology savvy students? And these two. Portable.
Portable mobile phones
And social
and
media.
social media.
I'm noticing with first year students though, many do not have a desktop or a laptop, they only have their phone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it makes a difference on what materials you should be using.
Yeah.
And things designed for a laptop or a desktop. In a phone, they can be quite small.
Yes, that's,
Too small for me.
and also for them. Yeah, I can't believe it's not. I completely agree with you. It's such a good point. And also, we can also teach students, and we also look at that about even if, because they only have the smartphone. And you're so right. I remember we had a writing exercise, an academic writing exercise, and they had to write an abstract. So I saw students trying to type in an abstract into their smartphone. But maybe it's not the right technology for that purpose. Are you going to write your final thesis using a smartphone as well? I mean, so that's
I imagine you can if you have the right keyboard.
yeah, an extension. You need an extension. But it's portable. So I sometimes we have a professional communication course focusing on speaking and listening. I say, well, why don't you use podcasts while you're traveling, you're commuting on the train? You can take it with you, or sometimes they look up a word. I do that, for example, where apart from getting directions with Google Maps, basic Italian, because I haven't studied Italian, so if I have to get by and buy my tickets at the station, I sometimes have to check. So it's very useful, very convenient when you want to translate something. And sharing, so it's going beyond the classroom world. So this has implications for teaching and learning. So some years ago, Warshauer and Hill, and you're probably familiar with this, defined a series of stages in the evolution of computer-assisted language learning according to the dominant paradigm teaching for language teaching at the time. So within a behaviorist view of language teaching, computer was used as the provider of control activities. That would be the first picture, giving students drills, telling them if they're correct or not. Then with the communicative approach, more a computer being used for communication, of focusing on meaning and the process of writing and interaction. And then at the time, the latest stage, integrative core, so as a computer for online communication, for information management, and learning being more interactive, being more social, and getting information beyond controlled activities. That is to say, the teacher relinquishing control over the material that learners experience. Then Stephen Baxi, by the way, you've got hyperlinks to what I consider to be key texts for those who want to expand their background. I'm sure that, well, you're familiar with those texts, but I was thinking of the students mainly, so you can access the original text. Stephen Bax worked on this taxonomy, but rather than stages in evolution, he referred to them as approaches, because we also use drills and controlled activities nowadays. People working with Duolingo and some exercises which are quite close. So we use all of them at some point. And I was I'm particularly interested in the concept that he introduced of normalization. That is to say, the technology becomes inconspicuous. Say, take notes, and people take their smartphone and say, well, I don't use technology. It's embedded in our practice. We don't say, well, I'm using a pen. No. So this is an interesting concept, I think.
I think it's very interesting how, I think it's also changing the, how can I say, the legal aspects behind it. So I see all the students are recording me. It used to be that students were not supposed to record. They would be like in trouble if they get caught recording the professor. Now I see, I try to ask them not to record me, but they all do it with their phones and stuff. So this is, I think there's legal implications as well.
That's
Don't
very,
they have to ask for
that's very,
permission?
yeah.
Shouldn't they ask for permission?
They should
They
ask.
do it, but they don't.
I
They
understand.
don't.
But-
And they do. It's very hard. It's very hard for us to know whether they're just having their phone here, just sitting there, or they're actually recording it. Especially students that are in the first rows or something.
But
You're
also
so right.
It's so normal recording and
Yes.
sharing because that's what they've grown
Yeah.
up with.
Yeah.
So it doesn't occur to them
Yeah.
that there might be issues with privacy.
Yes, and there are issues
There are.
on breaches of different types of laws, like privacy right, copyright. So the idea of plagiarism, taking things from here and there and copying and pasting. So different kinds of practices that might appear as normal, but you have to be careful, because if you can do it, even if you can do it, doesn't mean that you can really do it from a legal point of view. And also the technology becomes invisible. For example, in one of my latest partnerships with the TAP, we had students having Skype interviews with their American partners. So since this is a speaking course, I asked them to submit their assignments, which were the recorded interviews. So some students had problems with Skype, so I had taken that for granted. And I said, well, this is a normalized technology and not introducing something new, right? Maybe if I have to deal with all this, this is not normalized for me, because this is new, so I'll have to look at it. But I use my smartphone, that's quite normalized. So I assumed that recording Skype conversation was normalized, but it was not. Even with young students, university students, the technical university. So for them, some of them, we had to focus on the technology itself, not on the outcomes. So you raised an interesting point, and this is in fact the subject of handout number 2, about Google Translate and Writing Assistant. Well, this is a summary of Bax's different, well, not phases, but approaches. Restricted, like focusing on the system, open and integrated. And the type of activity that you can have in each of these phases, and he also argued quite rightly that you can have any of these tasks nowadays. Even if the table was created 15 years ago, it's still valid. Some more development, of course, technology on the move, mobile assisted language learning. And also the second wave of online learning and what goes with that, with Web 2.0, social call, this has been added lately, the idea of sharing, and the idea of prosumers, that again is linked to the idea of creativity, students as authors, and the idea of authorship, also licensing the work, giving others permission to use their own work, their engagement, and their voice. And then telecollaboration, I've taken one of the definitions that I use by some of your colleagues, internet-based intercultural exchange. So our TAP project would fall into the telecollaboration type. And here, and related to normalization, I came up with these different questions, zooming in on part of Bax's table, that of teacher attitude. In older approaches, teachers were maybe had some fear or awe, whereas with newer approaches, the attitudes of the teacher are, according to Bax, that technology is normal part of teaching. It is normalized. So my question here is, to what extent is technology normalized? Does full normalization exist? And how do we engage in technology with those students who maybe know more about technology than we do? And what is the added value of those technologies that we use in our everyday life? Do we tend to adopt technocentric approaches? I want to use smartboards in my classes. I want to use social media. I want to use, so putting the technology first. I don't know what your views are on these different questions, if you're interested in answering any of them.
Yeah, sometimes for me it's that I make the mistake that I assume that the students know how to use many things, and maybe it's not that. I mean, they are not digital natives. No, they are not. So maybe kids now are.
Mm-hmm.
So you still have to think about what is useful.
Mm-hmm.
So is it useful for them, or are they willing to learn how to use it? Sometimes they ask me, do I have to learn it? And I say no. But I mean, it's a plus.
Yeah, and it's an interesting reflection. We also had this discussion, you probably remember, Teresa, with TAP students and the Zephyr platform. One of our colleagues from Belgium has offered a platform for us, shared platform. And sometimes students are reluctant to learn. I mean, say, we use Blackboard, we use Moodle. Why do we have to learn or not? So then you sort of balance the different arguments. A counter-argument is that if you're graduating, you'll have to learn different platforms and different tools as part of your job. And what about your, you said, well, do you consider yourselves digital natives or not? Or
Yes, I do. I consider myself digital native because I use technology every day. All the university tasks, I use my laptop. Then we receive mails from the university, and we chat each other. So yes, I do think that I'm digital native. Of course, I still have a lot to learn because, for example, in job context, there are many different ways to use technology that I still don't know. But I think that as a digital native, I'm more keen to learn new approaches, and I can faster learn new approaches because I still have the basis.
So this fear here doesn't exist. So you say, okay, you're more keen to learn.
I find I have to explain less practically every year how to use the technology, that the students see what's on the screen and they know where to click, or I just go through an explanation and they all keep up with me, whereas once I had to go so slowly and run around the room helping people, and now it's far more automatic. Either that or I've got better explanation. I mean, you know, there was a time where we had a student who was doing that with a mouse because he had to get the cursor to the top of the screen. Those days are totally over. But what we do have to be careful is that the students know why they're using the tools. That I don't just want them to click
Added value.
at the end of their whatever they're doing in the exercise, but know how the resource can be useful. Why are we adopting certain strategies? How can the technologies help them? Because they all know where to click and how to complete an exercise. But it's the why and what can they get out of it that's not just clicking where I want them to click, if you know what I mean.
That's very interesting. That would be one of the disadvantages, that clicking is so fast and this hypertextual structure that they can get distracted because they have like too many things, or not doing the processing, or deep reading or careful reading that is required. So this would be one of the disadvantages.
I think there's this, huge problem is that we teachers have a hard time catching up with the technology that they use. So even though we use technology all the time, we're never up to their standards, and they're not up to our standards. So there's this big gap. So for example, I was listening to this show this morning where they were talking about the importance of collaboration and how social media is going to boom this importance of collaboration, and collaboration is going to be the thing of the future more and more. So that's great, but we have a different way of conceiving collaboration. The way so for example, they're very great at interacting through these devices, but then they don't talk to each other, and we expect them to talk, for example, in addition to using these devices. So there's a very different, there's different levels at which we relate to them. It's a little what she was saying, but very complex kind of situation. We expect them to do things according to our way of seeing things, and they expect maybe us to do things the way they want us to do things. So it's
I think it's something that you can see quite clearly if you look at how we read and how they read. That is, we learned to read on books, and the way we read on the web, no matter what we do, is still pretty much based on the fact that we started learning through books.
Linear reading.
And so on. They have a different approach, so that creates already a kind of difference between what we think that you put something on the web and you think it's going to be read in that way, but it's not. That's the other.
And which is the right way or the appropriate way of doing things. By the way, although
I'm curious. A question for them.
Yeah.
We're terrible. We're using technology more and more to teach, and not only languages, but on exams. Can you use technology, or do you have to use paper and pencil? Because when they read, they have their phone. They look up words all the time. You tell them to put away their phone and ask them to read a text that's a little bit different. It's a different skill.
Yes, of course, but if they're allowed to, we use it. I can say.
But are you allowed to ever?
Are you allowed
understand-
to use smartphones?
We can tell you that I let them use technology.
You let them use technology. In my university, smartphones are banned in exams, so you cannot, unless you're doing something. So my students cannot use technology during their exams. I do use technology, for example, projecting a video and or audio. So I use the technology. They don't have access to the technology during exams.
They write.
They have to write them.
I don't know if it's because of what we work on, that is translation, and I want to put them in the kind of situation that they would be if they were professional translators. And I also know that if they haven't used the technology before, it's not going to help them anyway. So that only shows and has a good effect on what they do
Mhm.
if they've done it before. If they haven't, it's not going to help them. So
Mhm.
I'm not giving them any unfair advantage.
No,
I think
that's
I'm just
that's.
giving them a
Mhm.
chance to show what they've
That's
learned.
right. I mean, and this is the only exception in certain practical subjects at university. For example, statistics, etc. They're not required to do statistics by hand during the exam. They're given the statistics program, but the computer cannot be used, so it's kind of blocked, and it can only be used for that purpose, or mathematics, or
And statisticians know how to block things well on computers. They're very good at it.
But even technology, I think, is there's a big problem because I know someone who works in in journalism, and he tells me that when young people come and they want to work for this magazine, that they have to write a text, and he says, no, just tell me, what would you write? And they say, no, I have to look up things, and he says, no, you don't have to look up things. If you only have 10 minutes or 20 minutes, you must be able to write
have an idea.
10 sentences. So sometimes it's that, but then maybe that's exaggerated because of course you have to look up facts. But then on the other hand, I think exams should be like Teresa said, so it's
Real
like
life.
normal life. But we've had really issues like interpreting exams with people recording and sending everything out with WhatsApp. So I mean that's also it's not the technology itself that's a problem. I mean,
It's the
always
use.
how
you use it.
I mean,
Mhm.
so I agree. I mean, you should teach them how to use technology. Then if you're
For
going to cheat,
certain
you
purposes.
always cheat.
And also it's a shortcut, but it's a real shortcut. So sometimes Google Translate is not the most appropriate tool. You can find other tools, for example, when writing for collocation. So I try to teach my students, say, okay, don't always use Google Translate. This PowerPoint is linear, but this seminary is not. So I've skipped several slides and might go back to them because you raised this topic of the digital divide 2.0. Which is precisely that the students' familiarity with technology does not mean that they're using it appropriately. So that's one thing. And the second is, okay, let's take advantage of those skills and put them to good use. Basically, in terms of digital literacies, well, I had this that I wanted to finish because it's related to the adoption of technology, and I would like to go back to it later on. But in a recent publication, I came up with this term, technology-rich environments, and especially warning us against adopting a technocentrist approach. And in fact, it reports on an interesting initiative in Los Angeles, which was complete failure, introducing iPads in all classes, in all language classes. But it failed completely. So they say, well, basically we need 3 requisites. One is access, so that was not a problem because everyone had an iPad. Skill, knowing how to use it, and usage. And this links with the idea of normalization. Is this a technology that we use that we can put to good use? So those top-down, large-scale programs, let's say the university is going to implement this, or let's use laptops all the time, let's use smartboards. By the way, at the moment I'm co-supervising a dissertation on this, an initiative in a country, in a very small country in Andorra, and to implement that, iPads, in the language class. So basically the PhD student is looking at these issues, how to advise policymakers and what training, what kind of preparation teachers and students need for this initiative to succeed.
What they did in my son's high school, they introduced, they had a survey. Who would like to be part of the digital class? So my son and my husband, in fact, I didn't agree, they decided that he was going to be part of this digital class. Being part of the digital class involved having an iPad. That was it. So after that, so they introduced the iPad, and the professors were not ready to teach in the digital new fashion. So they just replaced the book with the iPad. So the class is called digital class, but they don't do anything that's digital. They just read out of a book, out of a...
The book happens to be on the
Yeah, so they have access, but they don't accompany it with skill and usage. So we need all three. Okay, access to technology, that's it, we have it. Now, how are we going to use it? What kind of training? What kind of activities? And usage, it should be a normal activity for us. It should be normalized in order for us to be able to use it. So yes, it's... and it's this, the extent of access, skills, and usage define the affordances. So when we talk about technology, we usually talk about the affordances of technology for learning. So in this digital class, maybe they're not making the most, or they haven't found the affordances of that particular technology for the purposes of learning, I guess, language and other subjects. So, and this, I think, can be linked to, again, the integration of theory, pedagogy, and technology. So not only technology. And the problems that we have. So in developing countries, we can find problems of access. But here, maybe access is too fast, too quick. Let's replace books with tablets or laptops. But we have the problems of skill and usage too often. So again, technocentric approaches. This slide might be useful later on when we look at the activities. As an example, I wanted to focus on the digital literacies because we started talking about the digital divide 2.0, and I don't know, you have at least you have a computer. If not, I mean, you could use your smartphone. How digital are you in terms of digital literacies and your digital footprint? What kind of technologies do you use? I don't know if you know this program, this Mentimeter. Just go to menti.com and enter this code to vote, right?
After you have voted?
What do we enter? Which code did we enter?
Yes, 855018.
85?
5018.
Oh, okay, so it's written there, sorry.
The graph was based on our answers.
Yes.
Okay.
That's our answers?
Yeah.
That's your answers?
Who's the purple one?
So quite high, I would say, from 3 to 5, mainly 4. So we're all digitally literate, and because we're young people, so the younger we are, the more literate we are, right? And there is a growing interest in digital literacies. I don't know if you're familiar with the European the digital competence framework, the European digital competence framework, and they developed, it's quite similar to the Common European Framework for Languages. And these are the literacies that citizens should have. So maybe this is a framework that we could take into account in our classes, because it's for citizens. Information and data literacy, locate, retrieve digital data, information, content, and of course, we're overwhelmed with information, so it's using and processing all that information, because the problem that we could have is that we can drown in data, and how to store, manage, and organize all those data. Communication and collaboration, participation in society through digital technology. Our digital identity and reputation, and this is important for students who are about to graduate. The profiles will be scanned by prospective employers, so they'll search for you. How do you represent yourself online? Content creation, and this goes together with a set of literacies, especially remixing. How can we remix? Dealing with copyright issues, etc. Safety, protecting our devices, our content, our personal data. Privacy, and of course the example that you gave about students recording, so this is part of our safety and privacy, so you can enforce that. You can say, no, you're not allowed to record me, and this can have consequences. And problems, and dealing with problems, needs, and keep up with the advances of technology. And here they sort of break them down into different dimensions and different levels. So this is quite sophisticated in a sense. So there is a trend towards digital literacies. This is a video about using Web 2.0 tools, and the idea, well, this policy, this is a piece of news from the European Association for the Education of Adults, and the need for citizens to keep up with digital literacy. So if you're interested, you've got more resources here. This was pointed out already in the year 2000 about setting goals for our language classes. So in the past, we taught students to speak, listen, to read linear text. So this has to do with what we commented on, print sources. But now, when we teach communication, we teach computer-mediated communication, reading non-linearly, but the advantage of hypertext, combining text and other media, and collaborative writing, for example, through Google Drive or other sources. Of course, reading, we could trust print sources. We cannot trust everything we see on the internet. So critical skills are central parts of reading, for example, in research. And this has been our main focus in English for academic purposes. Recently, there has been this framework which you might find useful, another way of conceptualizing digital literacies in terms of communication, gamification, multimodality, dealing with information, for example, and sharing that information, for example, marking text with hashtags, tagging, filtering information, security, ethics in collaboration, and the idea of redesign, remixing, mashing up, authorship, copyright. So again, when students create their own products, they have to be careful, they have to protect their own work, and also take into account other people's rights. So this, you might find, this is a summary from a talk, but this table can also be found in different. So let me. This is a revisited version of the table they included in the 2013 and 2016 text on those four foci and the different kinds of literacies. For example, communication, texting, printing, but adding predictive text. How do we deal with writing assistants? Searching for information, but data. Collaboration, personal security. Spatial communication, including immersive environment, augmented reality. So as technology evolves, what are the literacies that we need? And redesign, remixing, but different critical literacies. And of course, they include this matrix with increasing complexity. For example, the most complex would be code and artificial intelligence. So you can go as far and as make it as complex as you wish. This is something that I came up with on Twitter, and I found this interesting. It came from a PhD dissertation saying average time of students using computers for academic work is 2 days per week, while they spend 5 hours a day on social media. So how can this be put to work? How can we take advantage of students' immersion in social media and technology? I don't know if this resonates with your experience. Are you online? So can this help students in academic, professional work?
I think even academics use social media for academic purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So they share information, they collaborate, even using Facebook, for example. So I think the students can do the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we use social media for collaboration, for dissemination of our work. And when you publish, they say, okay, share this on social media, and they've got the social media icons. Here, I don't know if you're familiar with this website. It's a well-known resource, the Tree Octopus. This has been used as an activity to raise students' awareness of critical literacies. Critical reading. There's no such thing as a tree octopus. Has to be protected. But the website looks quite professional and has the appearance of credibility. But then if you explore it further, you see that it's a spoof website. So this is to raise students' awareness, and there are lots of lesson plans based on this resource. I would like you, if you feel like exploring digital literacies, to explore these websites and see what digital literacies are encouraged, which of them you consider important, and then we can discuss that. So if you want to spend some time on this. Then you can look at the literacies that appear in these resources, or if they make you think of other literacies that do not appear here, but are important. And then there is this. I'm interested in saying what you think are the most important literacies. Of course, the answer would be it depends on the learners. So I restricted that to, for example, university students learning English, academic writing, and the code is 712286. Think about university students learning English for their university studies, for academic purposes. What do you think are the most important digital literacies? Are there any? I'll remind you of the code. here we've got like 3, I would say, huge literacies. So I can imagine like a lot of sub-literacies within sharing or collaboration. This would be like 3 of those foci of. Pardon? 3 is not enough. Oh, sharing critical thinking. There can be sub-literacy. So in writing, we can think of other literacies, like collecting information, synthesizing. Sharing the ethics. So maybe we can think of sub-literacies within each of these, to me, big groups. Any comments?
I always wonder, so when students arrive, I mean at university, so they, in my view, they should already have big knowledge or skills they have acquired at school, but sometimes it's very different. So there's not a, like you said, normalization. So I think at school it's not yet there. So it depends a lot from where they studied, which country, which city. It was a small town or a big town. So there's a big. It's not very democratic.
Yeah, you're right. So school is not there. You describe it quite well sometimes. So we find this discrepancy. I don't know about the students' view of that. Are you prepared for those literacies at school? Or is it should they come from school?
Probably today's schools are preparing better students to technological devices and technological usage than we did. We were younger, probably 10, 15 years ago. So probably there's still more to do, but
I'm not so sure. Last year I did one course in a secondary school, and it didn't look any more technology sophisticated, except for the register, than it was 20 years before. It was basically there. It was mostly books and writing on paper.
Yes, and I wonder if it's...
And it's a big school.
There's nothing wrong with that. And the focus
No, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Technologically literate, they didn't seem to be. But they all had phones, which they shouldn't use in the school. And that's it.
So we're going to wrong literacy. Yes, and maybe focus on technology doesn't mean a focus on literacy. And I remember your example, okay, let's have laptops, let's have tablets. But do they come with a certain focus on literacy? And now the question of how. So we say there should be more focus on digital literacy, but how? What kinds of activities could we promote to focus on to help develop those digital literacies?
Task-based activities where students have to explore and look for evidence, where they're encouraged to work together as well, because they learn from each other and notice different things.
So the idea of sharing
And producing.
and producing. And raising their awareness towards different creative processes, including remixing and using.
When I was reading the links that you gave us, there was on one page they were speaking about this fish model, the focus, investigation and sharing. I think we do that together in a group of students then.
Yes, integrating and sharing here the fish. So collaborating, exploring.
Can I say something? This is, I think, a very super important issue. And like, I think I don't know, behind this, I think it's not clear. I don't know. I have three children. They're all. I'm very involved in this kind of issues because it's very much. I deal with this stuff all day long. So I think we still haven't. And like one of my daughters is studying in the U.S. They have a very practical approach. And she also studied in high school in America. Very practical approach. And here we have a very theoretical approach. So what is the right combination of practical and theoretical? So here we're too theoretical. We don't do practical stuff. And yet, when our kids with this very theoretical approach go to the US or go to the UK that have much more practical approach, they're very good. They are at the top. They are top students, but they can't do anything practical. There they learn all this practical stuff and they don't know like where's Germany or like very basic stuff. And so I think today we still don't know what is the correct approach, what is the necessary approach that you need to have to compete in the world. I think we haven't solved that yet. What is the right balance between theoretical and practical that we need to face tomorrow's challenges? This is something that I think is very hard to, and so if we haven't solved that issue, then I think this is, that is behind this kind of problem. Because we need to understand what is the right combination between these two kind of approaches.
It is a very interesting point. So, but we have to be dealing with this because this is part of our lives. For example, we might encounter problems, as you mentioned, when someone shares information that shouldn't be shared, or a student produces something by copying and pasting, or not reading critically. The idea of sharing, which we do on an everyday basis.
Italian students read so much more. I don't think they write more, but they read so much more than Anglophones. Everywhere, I think. They're asked to read a lot. In university, I think that's changing here, but at secondary school, they read a lot.
Really?
And they have homework, lots of it. In secondary school in Britain or America, you don't have very much homework anymore.
So this is an interesting point, and you say, well,
It's considered useless learning. That all that theoretical knowledge is considered useless, in a way.
Yes and no.
maybe the answer would be like something in between, a nice combination of theory and practice. And you said something very interesting, to face tomorrow challenges. And we don't know what tomorrow challenges are. So some people are employed and are developing certain professions that didn't exist in the past. Or translators, you can think about translators who were trained like years ago and now are coping with some of these literacies that you need. You say, well, we need to use computer-assisted translation tools. I mean, it's not an option. You have to use that. So it's interesting. And I've skipped hands out one because I'd like to to move on. But anyway, you've got the material here, and you can use the print version or the computer version, because Teresa has made copy. Oh, you have a copy of the handout already. Google Translate, and you are lecturers in translation and writing, so it will be interesting to hear about your views. So it is said that young people write on mobile devices and you write electronically all the time. So what do you need? What skills do you need? And what tools can you use? And what about those tools that people use, or that should be banned or not, or that some teachers don't allow in class, like Google Translate and writing assistants, from spell checkers to predictive text, etc. And there's a link to 2 articles. Of course, we don't have the time to read the articles now, but here I've included a few quotes. They say, well, if the technology is available to and useful for students, they will use it, whatever their English for academic purposes instructors, counselors advise. So you can basically say, don't use that, but they will use it anyway. And the use of Write Assistant, this is by Sven Tarp and colleagues, and the use of machines that write text. And you can think of machine translation as well. We're thinking of writing, because I'm more familiar with writing, but you can add computer-assisted translation tools. So if part of the job is done by a machine, what is left for the human, or in what way do these tools assist or not, and how can we take advantage of that?
I think that computer-assisted tools are good to give us a first version of the text, for example. But then the phase of revision and improving the text is an important task of the user, of the man. Because we can't trust machines.
So maybe your task would involve a bit less of translation and more editing, proofreading. So, and what implications does this have for teaching? For example, when you train translators, do you pay more attention to editing than to certain basic skills? A bit they make this comparison with simple calculators, or maybe with spell checks. You don't need to know a lot about spelling, because this is something the machine will correct, but you need how to organize information, for example. The example you mentioned, how do you organize the text? Are we too dependent on technology that if we lack that, we're no longer able to write or to translate? So it would be.
Yes, I think we are, because, for example, if I receive an economics text, so on business, whatever, I can find similar information on the website. So something that does not correspond at all, but that to a certain extent is similar. So I can look up information and use this information for my text. And I believe that the phase of editing and revision and to put things the right way is an important task of the user today, because I believe that almost every student look up the web to look for similar sources and similar texts.
Yes, and also Google Translate. And so people say, well, we don't need translators. I already have Google Translate, lay users. And, or even people who own small businesses, they might say, no, I don't need to translate to get a professional translation done. I can have this tool that translates something, and then the result might be funny, but I don't know, because I don't know languages. And I was thinking of writing, and one of the questions that the authors of this article raised, because they talk about academic writing, legitimacy, for example, they say, what about authorship? Can a student who's written a text in their L1 and translated this text through Google Translate, for example, into the L2, or doesn't know how to conceptualize something, does this count as academic writing in English?
No.
It's very easy now.
I think it also depends who your students are and why they're doing certain writing tasks.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if your students are engineers, maybe they just, I could be totally wrong, maybe they need to be able to show that they can use English in a certain way, they can produce it in a certain way, okay? But these students here are language experts.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, they need to be able to use the tools, and these tools can help them produce fantastic English, but they also need to be independent. So when they get up there in front of a class or do a presentation or have to write a text without any kind of support, they can show that they are language experts.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise people are going to say, what, they got a degree from the University in English from the University of
I get
Canada.
everything through
And
Google
they can't do
Translate.
anything without a
Yeah.
computer. So computers or technology is fantastic because it really helps us. It even helps me when I'm producing English. But I also can do it by myself.
Yes.
And you need to be able to do it by yourselves as well.
Yeah.
And it's like a form of scaffolding. The technology can help you learn to do these things by yourself, but you shouldn't always be totally dependent.
Mhm.
Although perhaps as translators you can be, because professional translators
Yes,
are
that's
sitting
true.
in front of a computer, and so they do have access to all of these resources that can help them. And I think for academic writing, or any kind of writing or speaking, you need to be autonomous as well.
And also depending on the context and the level of proficiency, so some students, for example, who struggle with a foreign language but have to produce something very sophisticated. So the authors of this article present like both sides of the argument, saying, well, if technology does the basic, you do something else, as you mentioned, and also kind of crutches or kind of scaffolding. But well, up to a certain extent, and we can manage that students will use it if they need to do that. And predictive text as well, which can also be annoying, and we all know that from our smartphones. So, and yes, the example, well, and this would be similar to the statistics exam I mentioned. So students are not required to do the statistics by hand. The machine does it for you. So you can spend that time thinking about the right formulas to apply, but not developing the calculations. So it's a little bit the discussion that I wanted to bring here before moving on to the three topics of autonomy. And well, after digital literacies, autonomy and creativity. So briefly, learner autonomy. Any comments on the relationship between autonomy and technology?
I have a problem. If you're technologically dependent, are you autonomous?
Mm-hmm.
What is autonomy then?
Exactly. No.
Because
To
you
me,
can
that's
be
what
independent of the
question-
teacher,
Yes,
so you are more autonomous.
you are more autonomous. But then you could be dependent on technology. So autonomy, but autonomy doesn't necessarily mean independence. What does, it depends on the view of autonomy that we adopt. If it's independence or if it's a good point. We're independent of the teacher, but not of technology.
Autonomy, oh sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Autonomy, like a little bit like portability, so you can do it even if you're not in front of the teacher, maybe in that
Maybe
way.
that
So
would be.
it's easier, but not that it You still need the teacher, but you can do some things even if you're not in class.
Yes, doing things outside class and technology can help. Yes. You wanted to say something, or?
No, I said before that, you know, it's important for certain users of English to be autonomous, to be not to be totally dependent on technology, but I think technology is fundamental for promoting learner autonomy. Hopefully, otherwise you will be dependent on a provider of language, the expert. And this I'm thinking back to my early years of teaching, where there wasn't much technology at all, and I was the expert, and if somebody wanted to know how to pronounce something, then they asked me and I produced the word, and I'm never asked anymore because it's obvious that you just have a look and you listen to your phone. So yes, you can be more autonomous, and you can look up 100 words when you want, whereas you wouldn't ask me to pronounce 100 words.
Yes, you're going to be asked 100 times, or carrying a dictionary along with you.
Teacher's autonomy as well.
Some definitions of autonomy, so it depends. Take charge of one's own learning. This is the first one, basic one. Control, decision making, choice, but also collaboration and engage. So if you're not engaged, if you're not motivated, if you're not into it, it's difficult to. Autonomy and involves use of the foreign language, also awareness and interaction with others. In terms of online learning environments, again, awareness, reflection, interaction and experimentation in the sense of doing things with language linked to being creative and playing with language a little bit. And of course in English for academic purposes, maybe because I come from an English for academic purposes and we're in a university setting, I'm focusing on that. So again, having general study skills, but awareness, critical perspectives, and linked to digital literacies and all sorts of literacies and critical thinking, not only digital. So some of the definitions and concepts. And technology, some years ago when the internet appeared, they said, wow, we have a virtual self-access center. So you probably remember language labs in the past. So now a language lab is a computer lab, basically. And this is an old article, but it's interesting because it reflects the change from a physical lab to an online lab, even if it was done like 20 years ago, but it's still an interesting read. And of course, linked to academic literacy and together with internet skills and digital literacies. And the idea of interdependence, that we're not independent, but we help each other in a sense. So this has been emphasized more recently. And even more recently, this fusion between technology and autonomy. More locations for learning, even on the street. More options in terms of teaching. Less formality and more learner control. And this happens, and this is something that we see with Teresa with the tab. We don't know what students are doing, but they're interacting with the partners in technology. So the technology or the change becomes apparent when there's a problem. My partner hasn't replied. Then you have a problem. I don't know how to record an interview on Skype, and you have a problem. If they don't say anything, it means that things are going well. So, and this fusion, so students have their smartphone there, and you don't know what they're doing. So sometimes students are on Twitter, but sometimes you see students with a smartphone saying, what are they doing? And they're using Google Translate because they're trying to cope with the language that they encounter in class or in text or slides. So this is something more. So what is the teacher's role if students use technology? We don't see this technology and they have greater control over activity, over the technology. We're going to say, don't look at that. They have it already. And outside class. So what are the challenges for teachers and learners, and what is our role there? We're a bit, as you said, we're less of providers of information or of correction or of models. They have other models. What can we do for them?
We're there when they need help. We try to set a setting or to give a task, and then we are there just going around, or if it's online, then you're just checking what
Yes.
It looks like you're doing less, but in fact you're doing much more before and not during the work.
It's very important preparing the setting, organizing everything, which requires a lot of work. So it's the tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot behind that. And being there. And creativity. Well, it's intrinsically human, so it seems to be at odds with technology, so computers cannot be created. And some defining characteristics from a book on creativity, the idea of something, when you're creating, we're creating something new. So this is maybe the first characteristic that becomes apparent. Something, they say, effective. Well, effective doesn't mean useful in a utilitarian, from a utilitarian perspective, but effective in the sense that it's beautiful, it's pleasant, that we enjoy, that we give value to, and ethical. Also, in a recent definition, Alan Malley talked about an elusive term. Well, what is creativity? Maybe we can't define it, but we recognize it. And he tries to approach it from several characteristics, like newness, something immediate, people respect, result of experimentation, constraints, so not everything. So we can try to think of applying this creativity in our classes. So it's okay to let it flow, but not let it flow completely free. Some limits and boundaries. There is value. It flows. Do you think that there is creativity in our classes? To what extent? Can we teach creativity?
I think that technology gives opportunities for the students to be creative, whether or not, I mean, I don't teach them to be creative, but I would like to think that using technologies they can be more creative. I mean, once they would have just written text on a piece of paper, but now if you're asking them to produce a blog or a brochure or, you know, these are the things that they can now do, and they've got an audience, so the task is more authentic, and so...
You can have this atmosphere. So this is the atmosphere. So you can have the atmosphere, create the atmosphere for students to be creative.
The environment, they've got the resources to be creative.
And if they have true conversations, it's creative. They're
True.
all new.
They're all new.
Yeah.
They're all effective.
No. They're not all effective.
And the question, and you immediately answer it, can we promote creativity through technology? This is again a link to a chapter on, I think it's an interesting project in Hong Kong. It was for engineering students, English for specific purposes, and it involved students in developing videos related to their disciplines. So the authors say, well, creativity, according to them, has these three dimensions: the social, in terms of teaching creativity, pedagogical, and effective. So that students, if students are not anxious, if they feel comfortable, if they feel at ease, if they trust the partner as the teacher, if you have a sound pedagogical rationale, and social in the sense of collaborative, this can encourage creativity, which in this case is linked to discovery, a bit the fish movement, discipline related, so investigate about science and technology and create something from that. Student oriented, exploratory, collaborative, and that this tends to be prone to the integration of digital literacies, because they go through all the stages that are involved in the creation of a video, starting with having an idea, preparing your storyboards, and then editing the video, sharing. So all this involves a series of literacies, digital literacies. And they say, well, it was not enough to do the video task, but also to reflect on how it went, and so they wrote a report on that. By the way, this is taken, these 2 chapters are taken from this book, Essential Competences for English Medium University Teaching. And I'm showing it to you because this book is oriented towards 4 competences: critical thinking, creativity, autonomy, and motivation. So and now the last part, and I hope to be talking less, I wanted to show you several projects, and I can talk about all of them because I've been part of them. So if you want to ask any questions, and I intend this to be autonomous, so I'll be walking around and not talking, saying, well, how can we use technology to develop digital literacies, autonomy, and creativity? The idea of project work, you mentioned task-based approaches, so producing something that is real life, dealing with disciplinary content and practices, multimodal, so not only written text, collaboration, authenticity, authorship, ownerships, for example, in the sense of students of science and technology being able to talk about that, saying, okay, we own the subject, not the teacher doesn't. So maybe you want to look at those projects. I'll go through them quickly to give you some context, how they integrate technology, the tools that are used, if they're normalized or not, and you can, if you want, you can try to link those projects to your own situation and think of what projects or what activities you could develop or do develop in your classes. If the tools that you use are normalized or not, what theories of teaching, learning, and language underlie those practices, what the roles of teachers and learners are, who manages the activity, who's in control, engagement, strengths, caveats, and adaptation to other contexts. Basically, do these projects relate to your own context? Any lessons that can be applied to the design of an activity of your own, in the case of students, if you want to start designing an activity? Very quickly, the first one, and then you can go to the project that you're most interested in and you can explore it in more detail. I'll just present the 4 examples quickly, and they have to do with the projects I described at the beginning. The first one, well, Teresa, this rings a bell, is the Transatlantic and Pacific Project. You here at Padova, you've been involved in writing and translation, so I wanted to put here something different. Has to do with 2 projects in which we linked my engineering students doing technical English with technical communication classes in the United States, and we focused on the skills of speaking for the sake of variety, because here you focus more on the skills of writing and translating. One of them involved my students, and this is the screenshot you can see on the right. My students are giving a presentation on a technical topic on a real project. For example, this project involved students' collaboration with the Spanish railway network and developing an automation system for trains, for commuter trains, a braking system. So basically they videoed the presentations which they offered. They posted them on Facebook, private group, and they shared them with American students who critiqued them and provided some kind of peer review. And the second project was the linking of one of my classes, speaking with a technical communication class in the US. So they had those Skype interviews, and American students wrote an essay about my students' professional profiles, and also a LinkedIn bio that my students could use. And here you've got an extract from one of the essays, which not only focused on my students' profession, because they're in their final year, so they didn't focus only on their professional or educational background, but also on their hobbies. And here, in this extract, the American student said, she's a piece of the puzzle that brings them together. When she talked about her team and her experiences with human sour making, her eyes just lit up. So this essay focused on my students' participation. I don't know if you're familiar with this. These are typical in Catalonia.
Yeah.
Yes, you are. Human towers.
Engineers do that.
All sorts of people, little children. And so she's involved in human towers. Of course, this has to do with team building and teamwork skills. Example 2 is taken from the online course that we offer to any student from any Catalan university. And we adapted an activity some years ago, which was called the Grammar Safari, which is nothing more than a very basic concordancy, homemade concordancy, using simply the web browser and the word processor. Of course, there are, as you know, because you use Corpora, more sophisticated tools, but this was and students generated their explorations. They were learners of English from any discipline. So they came up with their own examples and their own lessons, so to speak. And this is the Quantum Leap, the online learning environment, which involves listening, reading, writing about topics of general academic interest. And the specific activity that I use with my students even nowadays, because it kind of works well with them, is designing an environmentalism quiz. So the purpose of this activity is that they carry out research in English, and that they learn the English they need to do research and to present research in front of the class. So basically they're asked to write a questionnaire to make people aware of environmentalism issues. They prepare the Google Forms or whatever they want to use. They give it out to a few respondents. I'm happy with a pilot study. And then they develop a quiz like the one you've got there. Those students focused on sea and oceans wildlife and being threatened by pollution. And they present the results in front of the class. And finally, example 4, and if you're interested in this, there's a link to a chapter I wrote on autonomy and collaboration online. In that course, also with the Grammar Safari, was English for academic purposes, learning English through the web. And we taught this course for a number of years, basically to help students develop their academic English, but also to offer them choice and to develop their academic and digital literacies. The last activity in the course was a collaborative activity online, because students didn't meet at any point and they were located in different places, and they had to design a language activity from a website or any resource on the internet that was not intended for learners of English. For example, some of them chose the BBC News, for example. And they had a wiki, we gave them a template, so they had to prepare an activity, share it with the partners, and then do the activity suggested by another group. So some of the instructions included this: choose a web resource that is not for language learning, identify areas or skills for learning and practice, for example, grammar, vocabulary, listening, etc. And they use a template. We gave them a wiki for their creation and an online forum for each group for communication. And in the boxes you see some of the wiki extracts. So they used both tools, the wiki and forum, in combination, and sometimes they included reflections on the wiki itself. So you can choose any, explore them, and I'll move on to the last slide. Yes, thank you for coming.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Bye.